Thank you. And good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is John Sheehan, and before I begin, I certainly want to take a moment to recognize the National Police Agency and thank them for hosting this event, allowing Ncmec to be here and to share some of our insights. It's a great honor to be here today and to partner on such an important cause. Before I begin, I think in some ways I should provide a little background into who our organization is and what it is that we do. Some of you probably have never heard of the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. Our organization was created in 1984, so we've been around for quite some time, and we were formed on the heels of a national tragedy. There was a young boy by the name of Adam Walsh. He, with his mom, went to a local shopping mall one day. They were in the store looking to buy a new lamp. And as they went through that store, they passed the gaming section. And Adam wanted to go and play at the kiosk. There were a few other children there playing at the gaming console at the time, and the mom, Reve, thought it was perfectly safe and fine to let him go play on those gamings while she was just a few aisles away looking for that lamp. As the boys were playing at that game on the gaming console, there ended up being a bit of an argument on whose turn it was to play next. And a store manager came by, heard the commotion, thought they were a group together, and basically ran them out of the store. And in that moment, while those kids were ushered out of the store and mom was just a few aisles away, Adam was abducted. And about 10 days later, it was discovered not only was he abducted, he had been brutally murdered. The Walshes, they channeled that pain, that anguish, that anger of losing their son, and they became child advocates. And just a few years after that abduction and that murder in 1984, our organization was created. And so we are located in Alexandria, Virginia, just outside of Washington, D.C. Our mission as a nonprofit organization is quite simple. We want to help reunite families with missing children. We want to reduce child sexual exploitation and prevent child victimization. And on the screen, you can see the building where our headquarters is in Alexandria, Virginia. We have about 400 employees, and as you heard, I've been there for about a quarter century now, 25 years. And so much has changed and grown through those years. The intersections of child exploitation and technology, in many ways, in shapes and forms, areas that we never thought could be possible. What you'll see on that screen where it says every child deserves a safe childhood. That is not just a slogan, that is really embodied into the mission of our organization and many of the reasons why I'm here today. In my portfolio, it's not just children in our backyard, it's children all around the world. How we can partner, how we can collaborate, and how we can make the world safer for children. And I thank you for all that you do in this space. And so today, I wanted to take a little bit of time to try and share some insights, some of the stories around what we're seeing in the current state of affairs. And as we were collaborating for today, when we started late last year, some of the statistics and data that I created within this slide deck that we're going to discuss, we weren't through the entire year. So you might be wondering, why are there 2024 statistics on this screen when we are just now kicking off 2026? Well, in some ways, you're in luck, where I'll do a bit of a comparison. I'll be able to tell you what happened in 2024 and some changes that have taken place in just a short period of time within that year. So on the screen here, you see that in 2024, our cyber tip line received a little more than 20 million reports. We finished last year, 2025, over 21 million reports. So the numbers have increased slightly. What I would say some changes that took place, though, were related to some of the subcategories under those overall numbers. And part of what I'm going to share with you today, some of the insights, they're coming from the cyber tip line and from our operational programs. And on the screen, you can see a breakdown of some of those reports, what's coming from what we call electronic service providers. So the companies, the big providers, every global big provider you can think of that's in the US, they're required by law to report to the cyber tip line. But we also receive reports from members of the public. So in many respects, the cyber tip line, in the nature of where it receives its information, it truly is at the tip of the spear when we're talking about the war against child sexual exploitation. Anytime there's a new trend or a new issue that's popping up, the cyber tip line typically sees it first, whether it's a company that became aware of it or children who are being exploited that are making reports themselves, or their parents, guardians, or other members of the public. I mentioned that the companies are required by law to report into the cyber tip line. That law was first passed in 1999. So we launched our cyber tip line in 1998, and just a few months, years later, short period of time, United States Congress realized the value and opportunity that the cyber tip line brings. Now that law that requires the companies to report to the tip line, it's evolved over the years in many ways, shapes, and forms. And you see a couple of those pieces on the screen today. Companies are required to report when they become aware of child sexual abuse material, but the contents of the report, that's permissive. So sometimes you get some companies who give very rich, robust information, and in other cases, not so much. And we'll talk more about that when we start to discuss generative AI in this deck. There are some companies that are providing very rich, robust information where I can show you actual user prompts where individuals are typing into the machines and asking for very vivid, explicit content to be created. And then in other cases, the company gives us nothing. They tell us that it's related to child sexual abuse material, but nothing as far as the imagery, jurisdictional information, or who the suspect is involved in the case. And at the end of the day, they're still meeting their legal requirements in submitting the reports. So we're constantly trying to work with the companies and improve their reporting. The big providers, if you think of Google or Meta, some of them, they're giving rich reports, great information into the cyber tip line. But there are some that aren't. And those that don't report well, Ncmec does their best to keep those reports away from law enforcement. There's no reason that those should be bogging down the National Police Agency when there's nothing that they can do with those. We try and weed out what we call white noise so you can stay focused on the actionable reports. Now this law, you see some pieces in here. There was an update that's taken place. One was the Modernization Act in 2018 that allows companies to help escalate and elevate reports of high priority. Last year, the Report Act was signed into law by the President. The Report Act expanded this obligation for companies to report child sexual abuse material, that they now must also report any cases that they're aware of involving the online enticement of children, as well as child sex trafficking. It also changed the law so that the companies have to preserve the data for 1 year. And that's important because many of the international law enforcement agencies working these cases, you know how cumbersome the MLAT process and time-consuming that can be. And the last thing you want to do is start working these cases and the data isn't there when you serve legal process or get those returns. So the companies are now preserving the data longer, which gives a lot more buffer for law enforcement in their investigations. Now, if we're looking at 2024 compared to 2025, some of the statistics that are on the screen. So I mentioned to you that we had a little more than 20 million reports in 2024, and that 2025 it increased to over 21 million. What were those changes? Well, we actually saw a bit of a reduction in reports regarding child sexual abuse material. So the images, the videos, what's still codified as child pornography in the United States, that actually decreased a little bit. And some of that can be attributed to a number of factors. Companies that are improving the hash sets that they're using to scan for said material. Encryption is involved as well, just a little bit there too, as well as features that we've created that allow companies to bundle incidents into one report to make better reports for law enforcement. Because it's not uncommon for a company at times to have to make multiple reports related to one target, and now they can bundle those types of reports, and it's much cleaner for law enforcement. What changed the most? And one of the pieces that I think is worth flagging when we're talking about legislation and opportunities that are out there was that Report Act. It passed last year. The online enticement, you see that a little over 500,000 reports in 2024. That number jumped from about 500,000 reports in 2024 to 1.5 million last year. Nothing changed as far as the threats to children. There were no new tools that were created that are helping to detect said activity. The only difference was the legislation that now requires the companies, when they're aware, they have to report it. It creates greater transparency into this issue, whereas before, law enforcement never had that opportunity to intervene and to rescue that child because they didn't know about it. It all comes back to that legislation. The same thing for child sex trafficking. We went from 27,000 reports in 2024 to over 100,000 reports in 2025. Again, the law is the reason for those increases. Now, I thought it was important to help give some perspective into the workflow, how these reports come into the cyber tip line, how they make their way to a particular jurisdiction. We use a great deal of artificial intelligence. We're going to talk about AI. I'm going to highlight some of the challenges with generative AI during my time this morning. But before that, I wanted to make sure I highlight AI can be used for good. It can really help to streamline workflow efficiencies. It can help to protect the mental well-being of the people that are doing this type of work. Because as you can imagine, this is extremely difficult, mentally challenging types of activities. It's in some cases uncommon that there are folks that are working this long in this space, especially the frontline workers, because of how mentally challenging these types of cases can be. So our general workflow for background is an incident occurs. Ncmec, we're a private nonprofit organization. Congress has authorized us to operate the cyber tip line to possess child sexual abuse material and all of the contents of the reports. It's very unique. It's definitely not lost on me that a nonprofit's able to do this space where really anywhere else in the world, it's a law enforcement activity. And we take great care and responsibility with that data and our role to ensure that we know exactly what our place is. We are not an investigative agency. We do not have access into any company's databases. Reports have to be submitted into the cyber tip line. It's a one-way street. I can't go retrieve information. I wait for it to be entered into the cyber tip line. At that point, we know what's happening. Whether it came from a member of the public or for a company, it comes in. Our goal, quite simply, with this flow to law enforcement, is to review that report, to assess the risk to the child, and we put a rating scale on that all the way from imminent risk, there's a life-threatening situation, all the way down to more of an informational type of a report that can be just used as intelligence. We will use both human review and artificial intelligence to flag off those reports, which we have to. You think of these millions upon millions of reports. There are times that the cyber tip line, we're averaging anywhere from 70,000 to 100,000 reports a day. There's not that many staff to go through that many reports. And we have a great duty of care to ensure that nothing slips through the cracks. It's up to us to flag that information to law enforcement as quickly as possible so they can review and intervene as necessary. So we try to add value. There right now are about 175 countries and territories around the world that are accepting cyber tip line reports. Some of those are through direct connections to the cyber tip line. Others are in partnership with HSI or FBI or Europol. And of course, in the US, we work very closely with state, local, and federal law enforcement as well. And so I mentioned that we leverage technology. There are a couple different pieces in here that I want to make sure I go through relatively quickly. First and foremost, we use artificial intelligence, AI, to help with people matching. The system, the machines, are always looking for ways to try and connect entities, identities. So whether it's a screen name, an email address, a phone number, maybe even an actual name that gets submitted into the cyber tip line. It's not uncommon for offenders to be on multiple different platforms. They might be on Instagram or Snap or Discord. More often than not, they're going to be on the gaming sites, all of the popular places that kids are, right? They're not going to go to just one platform. And these companies, when they're reporting in, we're trying to connect all the dots and try to get that information to law enforcement. If there are multiple reports on an offender, potentially that's a bad actor and someone that law enforcement wants to prioritize sooner than later. So we're trying to use those tools that is not so reliant on humans to be cross-checking and running those analysis. File matching. You saw a slide earlier on just the number of files that are coming into the cyber tip line. It's significant, the number of images, the number of videos that are coming through. We are using the latest and greatest technologies that are out there, both binary hashing as well as the cryptographic and fuzzy matching. We use tools like Microsoft's Photo DNA. We use a tool, Videntifier, for videos. Every single image and video that comes into our cyber tip line or our child victim identification program, we are generating digital fingerprints and comparing those. We're always looking backwards, we're clustering those together, and at the end of the day, trying to make sure that our team only has to view that sexually abusive image of a child once. They view it once, we label that image, and we teach the system. Now, there are multiple people in that review, and I'll talk about that in a second. But the goal is to teach the system so they're not looking at the same imagery that's recycled over and over again. Many of the companies are using hash values and digital technologies to detect known content. And there's nothing worse than slogging through the same content over and over again. The team, they join the program. They're here to help save new victims, and we want to keep them focused on that. So I'll talk more about that in just a minute. We're using AI to help with location prediction. Affectionately call it jurisdiction prediction. There's data within the reports. Sometimes it's IP addresses, sometimes it's phone numbers, sometimes it's information that's embedded in the files themselves. And I'll give you some examples today of where we're extracting that information. Every single image and video, we're reviewing that metadata and trying to pull out those important information to help figure out where in the world the incident occurred and to make sure it goes to the appropriate law enforcement agency. High-value reports. When there are 70,000, 100,000 reports a day coming in, how do you make sure that you don't miss the one that's going to help rescue a child? Well, I'll show you some examples of some alerts and different pieces that we've built out. At the end of the day, we have a partnership with a number of different companies, but one of which is Palantir. Some of you may have heard of Palantir. They are a big data company. They donate their technology to us as well as engineers. Being a private nonprofit, companies can donate to our organization. It is in the sum, just that donation alone, estimated around $10 million a year, just in the systems and the engineers who are building out custom alerts to make sure that nothing slips through the cracks. And I'll talk about that in a minute. But we also have a language analysis that's in there. As part of the law, it allows the companies to not just provide child sexual abuse images and videos, but we get the chat logs, voluminous chat logs. And so we have set up text-based alerts. Oftentimes, as you can imagine, these enticement cases, the sextortion ones that are out there, these are highly charged, emotional situations for minors. And oftentimes they'll talk about wanting to commit suicide or self-harm. Other times there might be something involving weapons or school shootings. We have all kinds of different alerts based on text to make sure if there's something of value, it flags off, and we look at that within the cyber tip line. And then last but not least, new images. Every single image and video that's been reported into our cyber tip line, it's indexed. Anytime a new file comes in, every single day overnight, the system, through these Palantirs and the comparisons, it's looking at every file that came into the cyber tip line within a period of time, that 24-hour window, comparing it to every single image and video that we've ever received since 1998. And it's telling us if the system has ever seen that file before. And if it hasn't, it's alerting the staff that that might be brand new content. And you need to go look at that sooner than later, because there might be a clue in that content that's going to help you identify a victim. And I will say that leveraging this technology, we are incredibly blessed to have partnerships with companies like Amazon Web Services. They donate all the cloud services that we need to do these computations. When you think about the comparisons and everything that's happening, it is computationally challenging. They can spin up those GPUs. They allow us to do this work. And instead of spending millions of dollars in just cloud hosting alone, we can keep that money into the operations. And again, that's all donated. Oh, wrong button. I mentioned the alerts. This is just a few of those that we've built. It ranks on the left-hand side there. That's the priority assignment. We built a way that companies themselves, when they're reporting into the cyber tip line, they can escalate a report. Oftentimes, the companies have so much more insights and data on their end that they ever report into the cyber tip line. So if they believe that a child is at imminent risk, or that offender that they're reporting is in a position of trust or has access to that child, maybe is a registered sex offender, has past histories in this kind of space, they can indicate that in the report. They can actually escalate it as it comes through, and we in turn provide that to law enforcement unaltered. In fact, we don't change anything about what a company reports to us. Through those data analytics and internal alerts, I touched on a few, but unique imagery. If we've never seen that file before, the team's going to look at it, whether it's images or videos. We also look for metadata. Many of you, when you're using your smartphones, do you leave your location settings on? That information gets embedded into the file, where you are, when you took that file. There's a date and time. There's usually a camera make and model. There's a serial number. We're extracting all of that information. If a report came in, for example, yesterday, and a file within that cyber tip line report, let's say it's a child sexual abuse image, the date that that file was created, let's say it was created in the last 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, our system's going to alert that that data point, that could be the individual that created the content or knows where it came from. It's in that recent time span that we'll try to alert to law enforcement. Interesting IP addresses or email domains. You'd be surprised the number of offenders who are engaging in this type of activity from work, and their IP address resolves back to their place of employment. Or when they went to create that social media account and they were asked for an alternative email address, you'd think that they would use some anonymous free web-based email. They would try to hide their identity, but instead they use their work account. Sometimes it goes back to places of employment that say that they have access to kids. They're a teacher or a daycare. We're extracting that information, we're reviewing it, and making sure that we're flagging it for law enforcement in that process as well. And we're also de-escalating reports. If it comes back an IP address, for example, goes to a proxy or a Tor IP address, one could mean that they're a bad offender, they're in Tor, but also the likelihood that law enforcement is going to get much off of legal process from that data is low. So we'll try and flag those as well. I mentioned the file-based approach. This is relatively new. It came about because of the pandemic. Prior to 2020, the staff and the teams, we had a very onesie approach. A report would come into the cyber tip line, we'd review those files, we'd label them based on the content and the context of the activity that was occurring, and we move on. Well, at least in the States, when those the stay-at-home orders came down, our entire team, we had to go home. We were not allowed in the office. There was the distancing. Weeks turned into months, and we realized that as we were going to start coming back into the office, that we weren't going to have the full weight of the team, right? And so very, very quickly, we started envisioning a new way to do business. And we built this entire process that now files are always coming into the cyber tip line. We're always doing those digital fingerprints. And instead of doing a onesie approach within the system, we're looking at them in bulk. So we can take every single file that came in within a period of time, whether it's a day, a week, a month, and you can get a great big, let's say, bucket of those files. And the first thing we want to do is deduplicate all of those images and videos down to one visually unique representation of that file within that time period. Then we want to do a comparison. Have we ever seen it before? Have we ever seen it, and have we ever labeled it? And you're slowly whittling it down to get to a unique set of files. And once you have that unique set of files, we're using some of the latest and greatest forensic tools that are out there. In this case, it's GriffEye's Analyze DI interface. We put those files into it. Our team goes through and classifies each image and video, basically ranking it. Is it child sexual abuse material? Does it involve infants? Is it particularly egregious with, S&M or bestiality, whatever it may be that have aggregating factors? We're labeling all of that content. And when they're done, we take that information, apply it back into the cyber tip line across the entire corpus of files. It's a much, much more efficient way, and it pretty much eliminates the team ever having to look at the same files more than once. And at the end of the day, all of this information is being made available to law enforcement around the world. I mentioned earlier, 175 countries and territories. There are some massive, massive volumes for some countries, some that are more than any one team could work within a calendar year, and which is why it's so important for us to build those alerts to make sure that we can help law enforcement focus on the cases of where you should start, the ones that are most likely going to lead to the rescue of a child. For example, I won't go into great detail on some of these cases, but here's one. We've been working with the National Police in the Philippines for quite some time. I've been there myself for a number of trainings, and they're doing fantastic work. Here's one case that came through last year. The images flagged off for our team as being brand new. We had never seen this content. We were unfamiliar with it. And so we alerted the Department of Justice there in the Philippines to this report, who in turn provided it to a local province, and very, very quickly were able to identify and rescue a 4-year-old little boy. Very young child. And the good news is he's out of that abusive situation. He's getting the help and the care that he needs, both physically and mentally, and you can see what he was charged with, the offense that took place. Another case, I know we have some friends from Thailand here today. This particular one that came through was from a company who actually alerted us that the content that they're dealing with appeared to be brand new. In this one, there were 5 different reports that came in, and in those 5 reports, 350 images and videos that we had never seen before. Now, I mentioned the metadata, the information that's embedded in that content. We extracted that. We started reviewing that and realized that this content, this individual had access to this one child for multiple years. So very clearly, it's someone who's in a position of trust somehow, shape, or form. I also mentioned that we're looking at those alternative email addresses. You can see up in the right-hand corner. In this case, he had provided an alternative email address that went back to that school. So for us, that's an aggregating factor. 1, there's a lot of images with a young child that were taken over a number of years. 2, this individual potentially works at a school and has access to children. Could be a very bad offender. And if you're still watching on this slide, you can see this person left their location settings on. So within that metadata, there were GPS coordinates as well. Now, you can't go kicking in doors just off of GPS coordinates, but it will point you in the right direction, and it's part of that investigative process. And at the end of the day, they moved this case very, very quickly. We alerted them, and within less than a month, this individual was arrested. Very good outcomes. So let's shift gears just for a few minutes here, and let me talk about generative AI. This is one of the newest, latest, and greatest challenges that we're seeing, and I want to try and break down the different types of cases that we're seeing, because they're vast, and there's different categories that you could put this into. We certainly are seeing survivors who are past victims, let's say, of child sexual abuse, where the images were created and disseminated. That abuse had taken place. Let's say it was done for all intents and purposes. The imagery is still being recycled and recirculated. Well, you have offenders that are collecting all of those images, all of those videos, and they want more. They're now trying to use generative AI to create new content. And these companies, they're detecting those prompts that are being used, and they're reporting it into the cyber tip line. And I'll share some of those prompts, how vivid and descriptive those pieces are. Some are looking for guides on how to groom children, how to abduct children, and even how to murder them and not be caught. They're trying to get these AI tools to chat with them and provide these types of tools. And we're also seeing generative AI being used in the sextortion space. And I'll give you an example. Very quickly with the data. So this volume that you're seeing here was from January of 2023 till about the middle of last year. As I mentioned, we were still getting through the calendar year as I was updating these slides. We actually finished last year with more than 1 million reports into the cyber tip line related to generative AI CSAM. So massive, massive numbers, much larger than we're even talking about right here. And if we break it down, when we're talking about generative AI, there's a spectrum. I think everyone's been watching the news and probably knows the word Grok and XAI at this point, and the way those tools are being used to nudify children. It's one of the ways that we're talking about that space that's out there. There are some, though, that are in the text-to-chat, and probably, in the grand scheme of things, on the lower level of the cases that we're talking about. But there are individuals who are trying to talk to the machines, if you will, wants the AI tool to pose and act like a child and engage in sexually explicit conversations and activities. Some may downplay that quite a bit. Personally speaking, I of the philosophy of where there's smoke, there's fire. These individuals that are engaging in that type of activity, they're the same ones that are going to go out and act upon those thoughts and urges. So it certainly still requires law enforcement investigation. Text to text, I mentioned that there are a number of these individuals that are looking for guides and information on how to conduct these types of activities. And then last but not least, the ones that you are likely most familiar with, the text prompts trying to get the machines to actually create said child sexual abuse material. Now, I'm not going to read this slide for you. I'll spare the interpreters in the back on this. But what I'll say is the quotes that you're looking at right here are from actual cyber tip line reports. These are prompts that individuals put into the machines trying to get content to be created. We are extremely fortunate to have companies like OpenAI that are detecting this type of activity and reporting it. And what I'll say is what you're reading here, it leaves very little to the imagination. But I'll tell you that as we were going through the creation of this slide about a year and a half ago, I went through 3 different iterations with our CEO. The ones that were in that first iteration were so graphic, she wouldn't let me use them. And so if you're reading these and you see how graphic they are, it gets much, much worse. They leave nothing to the imagination on what they're trying to get these machines to create. Now, I will say that what we're starting to see in this space, as far as creating content, there are offenders who are altering known child sexual abuse material. They're collectors in this space. They want to extend that collection. They're trying to learn everything they can about that child, whether it's their identity, and they want to continue fulfilling their fantasies about that child. There are other cases that we're starting to see where the innocuous images, so the non-nude material, the nudified type apps are starting to be used. And I'll show you an example now of the classic financial sextortion scams that we've often been talking about that are coming out of Nigeria, the Ivory Coast. There are cases where the victims have said, no, they're not going to produce that image. Now they're being threatened that they'll just use AI and extort them anyways. And then there's, of course, reports coming into our cyber tip line from the companies who are detecting known child sexual abuse material in the training sets, which is a problem in itself, that they're training tools that have this type of material in there in the first place. Many of the reports, most of the reports, in fact, from last year that came in from the generative AI companies were related to CSAM being in the training sets. And to us, that's incredibly challenging. Some will say that to combat the issue, the machine needs to know how to counteract it. But to do that, you have to actually teach it what it is. And how do you control that technology once it's out there? Very problematic. I mentioned that there are offenders now using these tools to extort children. This is from an actual cyber tip line report. It's one of those schemes where the person says, recently had that idea to create a video where you'd be pleasuring yourself, looking at the photos. The person used AI to actually do it and said how easy it was. And if you don't send me $850 through Bitcoin, I'm going to send it to all your friends through email, social media, instant messenger, etc. I don't know about you. How many 13-year-olds do you know that have $850? There are dozens upon dozens. We're close to about 50 children cases in North America alone, but certainly all around the world, where minors have committed suicide as a result of these sextortion cases. They escalate very, very quickly. They don't know what to do. So we are focused on education, prevention, and outreach to make sure they know that there's life after that one image, that mistake that may or may not have happened in that space. And it's not worth taking your life over. This report, or this quote, came from a report from a parent. This is one of those more and more common cases that we're starting to see come through where students are misusing the Nudify apps and the technology. They're starting to take images of their classmates and create pornographic content, sharing it within the school, sharing it online. And it's incredibly frustrating because as a parent, you're doing everything that you can to protect your child, yet parental controls, the conversations, etc., it's not enough. And I will tell you that in the coming weeks, Ncmec has already signed on to a global letter calling for the elimination of Nudify apps. I can't think of one good reason that those things are out in circulation and how they're used and why they're used. And so we really want to call upon the tech industry to make sure they're not available. It's not online, that we eliminate that type of activity. And I'll mention to you some of the victim identification challenges that we have coming through. This is just one case in the generative AI space where law enforcement reached out to us. They had a bunch of imagery that they came across in an investigation. There was a mixture of both CSAM, true known content, as well as the generative AI material. They arrested the individual. There was a grand jury indictment. Turns out there were almost 30 different victims wrapped up into this particular case. And here's one of those children. I'll give you this example. On the left-hand side, this is a child that was abused by a family member, photographed. Imagery was disseminated online between 2000 and 2004. The child was rescued from law enforcement. The offender was apprehended. The abuse stopped. The imagery is still out there, still being recycled and recirculated. So that re-victimization continues to occur. The image on the right, that was produced in 2023 by a different offender who used generative AI technology. That's the young girl right there in that photo. That's the face that the individual used. And just watching time, it was a teacher. It was a teacher at the school who was collecting images related to students at the school using known child sexual abuse material to create new content. And I can tell you that these tools have advanced so dramatically that there are times that when the companies are reporting these incidents into the cyber tip line, if it had not come from a company that's in the AI space, you never would have known that it was created by the machines. The days of looking for a weird digit or something that's quite off in that image, long gone. Virtually indistinguishable, the type of material that's now being created. And the news articles that you're seeing here is that one teacher that had dozens upon dozens of victims. And each one of the parents and the different victims were talking about the effects that it had on them. And some of them had to move from the community because it was just that well known and the abuse that was taking place. Another case that I want to flag for you guys, one of the first, in fact, this one came out of Wisconsin. The case came through, it was reported by one of the AI companies, and it was exactly the type of content that I described a minute ago, virtually indistinguishable. We knew if there was ever a case, because it was generated in very, very young children, infants, toddler type of material that was being created. Made its way to Wisconsin. They investigated. They arrested this individual. They've charged him and is now making its way through the judicial process. So it's one of those first cases that we wanted to see what happens. It had never been tested before as far as what are the courts going to say? Where are they going to go? But fortunately, if we fast forward a little bit, Wisconsin is just one of many states in the U.S. that are starting to criminalize the generative AI CSAM. And last year, through the Take It Down Act, federally, these were also designated that law enforcement can move forward, they can charge. There is no difference between real CSAM and the AI generated at this point in time for law enforcement. So as far as legislations, global legislations and spaces that need to continue to advance, it's not uncommon that law enforcement and many of us are always a step behind the offenders. Every time there's a new technology that comes out, the offenders, they adopt it very, very quickly, right? And we're always a step behind, but thankfully the laws have not been that far behind in this particular case, and we're seeing more and more of these move forward from both state and federal process. One of the last things I wanted to leave you with, because I certainly wanted to try and leave a little bit of time in case there were any questions, is that as an organization, we're here to help victims and survivors. I spent a lot of time today trying to explain how we're working with law enforcement, how we're trying to give them robust reports. They can rescue children and get them out of those sexually explicit situations. But I can tell you that we work with victims and survivors as well. There are close to 50, almost 60 individuals who are survivors, lived experience, both child sexual abuse, child sex trafficking. They're consultants with our organization who are guiding us as we're developing new programs, enhancing the services and areas of work. There's a dedicated web page on our website that is somewhat buried. Individuals go to that page because they need help getting their content down. And a few years ago, we put up a survey. We've never advertised this survey. You literally are going to this page seeking help. And in that survey, we wanted to know, why are you here? How can we help you? What is of most value to you? And the one thing they're not interested in is a law enforcement investigation. The next thing, they don't want their parents. They don't want anyone to know. What they want is the content down. So we created a program a few years ago called Take It Down. It's been translated into more than 40 different languages. Japanese is one of those. We are proud to partner with you, where we can help minors remove nude or sexually explicit imagery that's online. And the way that it works is that minor or someone that has images on behalf of that minor, they can use a device. They have the imagery themselves. They can go to take it down. The imagery never leaves the machine. It doesn't come to us. We don't capture any personally identifiable information. Instead, they transmit the digital fingerprint related to that material. We receive it. We make it available to the tech industry who can proactively scan their networks, remove it from public view, and report whoever those people are that are disseminating the material. So we're continuing to expand this program, make it available globally, all in an effort to help victims and survivors get just a little bit of their life back. Because that content is always recycled, it's always being recirculated, and it's the least that we can do in this space. So folks, I know we are really close on time. I appreciate your time and attention. It really is a great honor to be here today to share some of the work that we're doing and the partnership that we have with the National Police Agency. I don't know if you'd like to do questions now, but I'm around all day and happy to do it during a break as well. So thank you very much.